Calling the meeting to order. This is meeting 128 of the Standing Committee on International Trade, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 16, 2024. The committee is resuming its study of Canadian women and international trade. We have with us today from the CASA Foundation for International Development, Dr. Olaide, President. From the District Ventures Capital by video conference, Arlene Dickinson, Founder and General Partner. From Kim Oliver, Policy Analyst, Social and Economic Development by video conference. And as an individual, Helen Bobby Wash, Chartered Professional Accountant. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy days to be with us today. I just need to note that Ms. Dickinson has let us know that she will need to leave after, she's here from 11 till 12. I'm sure many members have anxious to connect with Ms. Dickinson. And the remaining witnesses will be here for the full 2 hours. So we have the one panel for the full 2-hour program this afternoon. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with rounds of questions. Each member has up to 5 minutes. I will introduce Dr. Olaide, and I invite you to take the floor and for up to 5 minutes, please. When you notice that I'm raising my hand, it'll just an indication that the 5 minutes is just about up. Okay? So thank you very much for being here, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Good morning again, Madam Chair. Good morning again, honorable members of the Standing Committee. My name is Olutoyin Oyelade, President of CASA Foundation. It's indeed a real privilege, a rare honor, to present my ideas to your esteemed committee this morning on the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy and how it has supported women in trade. WEST is not just a policy framework, but a roadmap that has unlocked the potential of women entrepreneurs to shape the future of Canadian economy. Moreover, Business Women in Trade initiative, launched much earlier, now managed under the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy, aims to boost women's participation in international trade. Although available data from ISED and Statistics Canada indicates a huge growth in the percentage of women in trade, generally speaking, but the question then is, how well have women in trade really fared when you talk about their contributions to the GDP of Canada? Available data from ISED, also from the website on Business Women in Trade, would state between 2021 and 2022 indicates that fewer women play in the international markets when compared to 12.5% participation by their male counterparts in the international markets. And so few women have access to the needed resources. This is general information and it is available generally. However, the question to keep asking ourselves is, how is this measured and how are the indicators put together to factor in mutual benefits? What is beneficial to the country called Canada on one hand, and what are the indicative measures that are put in place to make sure that women actually spearhead their own destiny, their own journey in the international markets? Because women actually do have dreams and choices on one hand. However, half of the time what we hear is the fact that we need to set up quota systems and make sure we allocate this to women and allocate this to them. It is important to do so. But there are other ways to look at it. And I'll be talking about that perhaps during the Q&A session. Situations where you put resources in place to have platforms where women can actually excel, platforms, ecosystem platforms where they can actually have access, direct access to the resources they need, because the information is not readily available, as we might assume. And so I am Nigerian, African, and there are the cultural parts of women entrepreneurship in trade globally. There is the culturally informed education that needs to be adopted or factored into the current strategy to make sure that women are also able to do what they need to do in terms of managing and leveraging the resources from the diaspora. So they have their connections before they ever came into a new country. they must be able to leverage that through partnerships, through education that is culturally delivered. And so these are some of the things I aim to talk about today. The broader impact that we're looking at also that I think we should be looking at is having a women endowment fund, for instance, so that even after all the funds has been disbursed to them in bits of 90 days, 2 years, 3 years, what next? After 5,000, what next after 50,000 to help them to scale, to help them to expand, and to help them to connect with clients across the globe. And I think that the Women Endowment Fund might actually be able to do that for us, and I hope I'll get to speak about that again later today. There is the Venture Lab part of it also that I think we should be talking about. For instance, CASA Foundation had actually put together programs where 5,000 is disbursed to women every 90 days after completing a 10-week program, because we got the needed support from some financial institutions, 5 to 10,000. But the question they keep asking us is, after the initial 5,000, 10,000, we're looking to grow into the international market. So how do we access this? So I see that there's a lot of effort concerted on a lot of the women that are already in business, because they're big, like medium-sized businesses, but a lot of people are not focusing on the lower rung of the ladder. And these are the people that can actually generate for us the needed resources. We're told, again, I allude to Africa, that there's an opportunity, a potential opportunity for 6.6 billion in revenues to be generated by doing business between the Canada-Africa relations. How do we bring women in to take a portion of that and make sure that what they're able to take for us is dovetailing into the Canadian economy? That's the way I think women can contribute to the national economy of Canada. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very, very much. Much appreciated. Ms. Dickinson, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the honourable members of the Standing Committee for letting me make some comments today. I take the subject of entrepreneurialism and entrepreneurship in Canada extremely seriously, and especially the cause of helping them continue to grow. So today I'd like to address and focus on 3 points. The first is the existence of the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy is a good thing, but it can be improved. The second is getting to the point of export requires growth and scale, and this part of the entrepreneurial journey warrants more government attention. And the final thing is that given U.S. protectionism, Canada must review the fundamentals of our business environment. Decisions that promote investment and entrepreneurship must be prioritized. So I focus on the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy. In 2014, I submitted a report to the government about women entrepreneurship. I thought then, as I think today, that in a perfect world, there wouldn't need to be a women entrepreneurship strategy. But it responds to a real bias in private and public sector investment, and my hope is that over time, this bias will be reduced. That experience spurred me to establish Ventures Capital as well as the Venture Park Business Growth Ecosystem, both of which support entrepreneurs in the food and health industries. The ecosystem has driven close to $2 billion in economic impact since its inception 8 years ago. That support tackles 2 persistent Canadian policy problems: the propensity with which we send our raw agricultural goods overseas, where value is added and jobs are created elsewhere. And second, the historic lack of support for women in entrepreneurship that comes in investor, financing, and social bias, all of which block women and often discourage or dissuade them from starting a business venture. The government has supported district ventures through FCC, BDC, and EDC. They're part of our capital fund. The government has helped to evolve the support system for CPG entrepreneurs in Canada, and that's a good thing. A small criticism here is that those programs are uncoordinated. This also seems to be the case with Women Entrepreneurship Strategy. Entrepreneurs are grateful but frustrated at having to look under a lot of different rocks for funding and not meeting criteria designed to create roadblocks to ways forward. Too many restrictions on too much funding creates the majority of capital being deployed into very tight sector circles. What would get better results is looking beyond the tech and energy sectors and supporting health and food industries more. These are industries predominantly led by women entrepreneurs. A big issue stems from the lack of investment support in total for women entrepreneurs. Only 4% of all VC funding goes to women founders, who represent 50% of the population. We need to change that, not just for the sake of equality, but to ensure larger social goals. Female-founded businesses tend to be more sustainable, and they tend to address skill gaps more consistently. Many private sector funds also include public capital. So these are partnerships where the government could enable change efficiently and under merit-based rules. There remains a lack of unaccountability in government programs to ensure enough funding is deployed to worthy females and women-led businesses. There is also a difference between starting a business and scaling a business. Governments often support early-stage entrepreneurs, but funding for growth and acceleration remain a challenge. Canadian entrepreneurs do not expand internationally if they have not achieved scale in Canada. Larger sources of capital are instrumental if the entrepreneur is seeking to thrive in export markets. Growth capital can't just be public funds. At best, it is a private sector investment. We need to do more to spur that private sector investment in scaling high-growth businesses. Finally, American protectionism and Canadian growth. My last point surrounds the deepening American protectionism that will affect Canadian entrepreneurs. As a country, we do not have the might to match beautiful tariff for beautiful tariff, nor would that be a smart approach. So we need to double down on growth at home, and we need to see women entrepreneurs as critical to that growth. That growth will only happen through high growth entrepreneurship. We need to declare support for entrepreneurship and then make changes to show it. And that could involve things like less red tape, less cost for starting a business, low or no tax on first revenue in a new business up to a certain amount, tax credits on investments in first-time entrepreneurs, reduce provincial trade barriers, and revisiting changes to the capital gains tax. This committee should also consider policy changes that would bring more women into entrepreneurship. My suggestion there is a more generous tax benefit for private sector investment in first-time women entrepreneurs and the businesses that support them. If the whole ecosystem can be rewarded for the right behavior, we'll be that much further along. These ideas would send a clear message that Canada supports entrepreneurship and that Canada supports women in entrepreneurship. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very much, Ms. Dickinson. On to Ms. Oliver for up to 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you. My name is Kim Oliver, and I'm a policy analyst with the Social and Economic Development with Pawtutit Inuit Women of Canada. I very recently started my position with Pawtutit, so forgive me in advance if I do not have some answers for the committee's questions, but I will endeavor to provide a follow-up written submission if needed. While the committee study aims to examine gaps and opportunities, it must address systematic, historical, and long-lasting structural inequalities. Inuit in Canada experience lower economic participation levels in the labor market than the national average. Inuit women in particular face numerous challenges, barriers in starting and maintaining businesses. Of Inuit of all genders, only 0.2% make up Indigenous-owned businesses in Canada from a sample composition from 2005 to 2018. According to recently released Statistics Canada Survival Rate and Performance of Indigenous-Owned Business Report. In 2021, Pawtutit conducted a study on Inuit women-owned businesses. They are engaged in a wide variety of businesses from artistry, retail, hospitality, and in the mining sector. Most businesses are small and are important to contributors to the household income. Cultural values are at the core of success. One of the most pressing barriers is the infrastructure deficit in communities. Access to affordable housing. Housing is a critical challenge and is deeply tied to employment and economic independence. In many cases, housing is provided by employers, and the cost is significant to privately own and run a home with heating, fuel, and electricity. Access to market rentals is limited. For example, in Iqaluit, there's 0.01 vacancy rate in available rental markets. In addition, not all these spaces allow for home-based businesses, and simply accessing standalone space is not a viable option in Inuit Nunangat. The income thresholds in social housing are complex. The more one earns, the less housing support, yet the higher earnings are rarely sufficient to afford private market housing. We face overcrowded and multi-generational housing conditions, which impacts one's ability to launch or grow a business. There's a lack of fiber optic cable internet connectivity. It is essential for business development, e-commerce, and professional training to enable connection with markets beyond borders. Geography further complicates these issues. Leaving our community to pursue opportunities disrupts family and community. Access to another hurdle is it is a struggle to secure the financing need to start a business. Systematic discrimination in financial systems, coupled with limited financial resources designed for Inuit realities, compounds this issue. Without capital, even most innovative ideas remain unrealized. Support and resources, in addition to government programs, are not easily accessible or well known. At Paututite, we are committed to initiatives that are meaningfully support leadership development. However, systematic support is necessary to enable success and fully realize one's potential. The Government of Canada plays an important role. Housing deficits must be closed. Investments in broadband infrastructure are essential to connect with broader markets. The government must consider shipping rates in the postal service so the large vendors are compelled to provide better access to free or flat rate shipping equal to other parts of Canada. Postal rates must be tailored with the rates that are significantly subsidized remote realities. Communities and businesses are heavily reliant on these services with no other options. Air cargo and waterway shipping options are limited, and air tariffs are determined by each carrier or at the industry level. While Inuit-owned airlines make efforts to provide subsidies for Inuit, there appears to be little government support. Shipping by waterway can be costly and not economical for smaller entities. It is essential that the government invest in roads connecting to larger centers to allow for freedom of imports and exports at lower costs. It must invest in reliable energy to move away from the high cost of diesel generation and the bulk of purchase of fuel shipped annually and stored in aging fuel tanks. Finally, invest in targeted funding streams that provide startup capital and business support tailored to Inuit realities. Financial and capability constraints are the key barriers to the economic participation and development of the Indigenous-owned enterprises. Honorable committee members, Inuit women entrepreneurs represent an untapped well of talent and potential. Our success is not just about individual achievement. It has the power to transform families, communities, and economies. Paututite is ready to work hand in hand with the Government of Canada to ensure this vision becomes a reality. Nakamik. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bobby Wash, for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. My name is Helen Bobby-Wash. My spirit name is She Who Mends Broken Paths. I am an Anishinaabe, a member of the Thessalon First Nation. I am an FCPA, an entrepreneur who has operated my own independent accounting service for almost 25 years, and a member of the Investment Committee of the Indigenous Growth Fund. I join you today from Swakamuck, the city of Greater Sudbury, situated in the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory. Women face barriers to entrepreneurship. Indigenous entrepreneurs also face barriers. When the two demographics intersect, the barriers are exponential for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. I'm going to share two barriers with you this morning. First, Indigenous women are the caregivers in our communities, and this competes for our time and attention for our entrepreneurial activity. Caregiving is a sacred responsibility that aided the survival of our people. We give birth to and raise children, not only those who we give birth to, but others in need of care, including aging family members. As much as we lovingly take on this role, caregiving competes with our entrepreneurial activities for our time and attention. I often travel to meet with clients. When my son was born, he and a sitter traveled with me. When he reached school age, I limited my travel to keep my son in school and be available for him. This limited my earning potential. It is an ongoing balancing act to take care of our family and business responsibilities, and it causes stress. Services provided to Indigenous women entrepreneurs must accommodate our family status. Second, there are barriers associated with the scale of businesses started by Indigenous women. Many start small, even micro businesses. We tend to start part-time or home-based businesses. This allows us to start our business with available financial resources and to be available for our family and community responsibilities. The micro nature of Indigenous women-owned businesses limits our access to financing because conventional financing policies exclude part-time or home-based businesses. The West Ecosystem Fund provided funding to the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association, NACA, for an Indigenous women entrepreneurship program. It provided options for Indigenous women to access microloans, training, and business supports. Accessibility to these supports must continue. Next, I offer two recommendations to further support Indigenous women entrepreneurs. My first recommendation is to provide trauma-informed services. Indigenous women experience trauma that has detrimental implications for them, their families, communities, and their business operations. Statistics Canada reported that almost 2/3 of Indigenous women experience physical and sexual assault by intimate and non-intimate partners. This is almost 2 times higher than non-Indigenous women. I myself have experienced violence. We also continue to be impacted by intergenerational trauma from harms experienced in colonial institutions, and we are profoundly aware of our safety in public due to the thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across Canada. It is important for providers of entrepreneurship services to take trauma-informed training and provide services in a manner that demonstrates that Indigenous women will be safe. My second recommendation is to provide financial capability training for Indigenous women entrepreneurs. In 2020, I conducted research for NACA on Indigenous women entrepreneurs. When we asked Indigenous women what knowledge supports that they needed, the top subjects were financial, such as financing a business, bookkeeping, and payroll obligations. Each of us develops our financial capability from childhood, observing how those around us deal with money. Many Indigenous people don't have role models to show us how to manage our finances. Access to financial services is limited in Indigenous communities, so this is not a part of the lives for many Indigenous people to observe. The financial knowledge gap is great among Indigenous entrepreneurs and even greater among Indigenous women entrepreneurs. Additional financial capability training will transmit essential knowledge and increase the efficacy of Indigenous women entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our witnesses. On to Ms. Gray for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here. And first, to Ms. Dickinson, I just wanted to say that as an entrepreneur, when you came out with your book, Persuasion, it was very relevant to me at the time. And also, I remember many years ago seeing you speak as the keynote speaker at an agri-food convention in downtown Calgary, and I wanted to thank you for your strong advocacy to protect food insecurity, so thank you. So my questions are for Arlene Dickinson. The Liberal government, in their budget 2024, stated, quote, increasing the capital gains inclusion rate is not expected to hurt Canada's business competitiveness, unquote. Do you believe that statement?
Thank you for the kind words, first of all. I appreciate that. I don't believe that statement. I believe it actually will impact significantly the amount of investment made by private investors back into our economy. The taxation is becoming to the point where it's not viable. What's missing in the entire plan is the notion that when we start a business, we're not making money at the beginning. Anyone who's an entrepreneur understands that you're putting years and years in where you're giving into the business. You're not taking anything out of the business with the hope that reward will happen 5, 10, 20 years from the time you start. And that investment is onerous. It's very difficult to get through. You've just heard from the other panelists that this is a journey. This is a difficult journey. And to penalize that reward at the end, which actually, if you spread out over the 20 years it might take to get that reward, the number of dollars that you're actually bringing into yourself are probably much less than you would make if you had a full-time job. That is just true for the majority of entrepreneurs who sell their businesses, if they can sell their businesses. So it is punitive. I don't believe it's actually helpful. I think it's actually very punitive to our ecosystem of investment in Canada.
Thank you very much for that. This study is focused on women entrepreneurs and trade, and many businesses start small, and then they look to expand and grow. And based on your extensive experience as an entrepreneur and as a venture capitalist, will Canada be less competitive for talent, investment, or capital in the global market because of this capital liberal gains tax hike?
Yes. We're going to lose entrepreneurs to other nations who are going to go to more tax-friendly environments. We are going to not be as competitive because we won't have the same amount of capital being put back into entrepreneurs. In particular, if you think about the fact that there is no tax benefit to investing your private capital into helping other businesses get started, and in fact, then you're penalized later on. There's just so many negative connotations to this. So I don't believe, I think also thinking about taxation as an ongoing issue and people saying, well, it's the rich people not wanting to get taxed more. I think that is a narrative that's actually very unfair and not true. It's not about paying taxes. It's about how we're paying taxes and where we're paying taxes and whether or not that's actually encouraging investment. So if we want to be competitive in the globe, we have to think about the tax regimes that exist in our largest competitive nations and our trading partners and determine how we can be able to sustain our nation, which requires taxation, of course, at the same time being competitive.
Do you believe that productivity and innovation are down in Canada?
Yes. Yes, they are both down. The stats will tell you they're down, but I can tell you just in terms of my understanding of the business community in this nation and speaking to many other entrepreneurs and many other successful large businesses, the innovation dollars, the R&D dollars are going down. When the innovation does happen in Canada, we are actually selling our IP to other nations. We're not commercializing here. And so, yes, there's no doubt that productivity and innovation are down in our nation.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've heard testimony from others at this committee, and we've seen other reports where, specifically on the innovation side, where many of those who work in the innovation economy believe that the Liberals' capital gains tax hike will have a very negative effect on the innovation economy specifically. So, again, based on your extensive experience as an entrepreneur and venture capitalist, do you believe it when the Liberal government says, well, it's not going to affect innovation in Canada, or do you believe the entrepreneurs who are saying that in fact it will with the gains tax hike?
I believe the entrepreneurs, I believe it not because they're saying it, but because we're all living it. And I think there's a big difference between, rhetoric that can say that, things are bad and it's the government's fault and, the taxation issues. It is an actual fact that it is happening, and we're witnessing it happen real time.
Thank you. Now, you wrote an article in the Globe and Mail in June entitled, "Stop It with the Class War Rhetoric to Sell a Capital Gains Tax Hike," unquote, about the Liberals' capital gains tax increases. And you said of the Liberal capital gains tax hike, quote, "The government has fundamentally, through one ill-conceived motion, declared war, not just on entrepreneurs, but on our futures, mine, yours, and the next generations," unquote. And I just want to confirm that this is your writing. We're down to about the last 20 seconds here. Those are very impactful words, and I'm wondering if you can just comment for a moment on them.
I stand by them. I think they're straight and they're clear and they're direct for a reason. We have to stand up for what we believe is going to help our nation continue to be competitive and help our entrepreneurs succeed so that our economy can grow.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Sidhu for 6 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to our esteemed witnesses for joining us here today on this very important study. Miss, forgive me if I pronounce your last name incorrectly, Miss Oyalade, am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay, so you had mentioned the importance of leveraging diaspora networks to grow business and, of course, maybe perhaps grow trade. And I absolutely agree. Earlier this month at the African Union high-level dialogue, I joined the Prime Minister, Minister Ng, and colleagues to lead a conversation with local leaders who repeatedly mentioned exactly what you have said about the vital links between diaspora communities and what role they can play to strengthen our business relationships. Can you perhaps maybe speak to how we can build on these important links, maybe within, the over 1.2 million African Canadian diaspora, and how women-led businesses can leverage this important link to grow their business and trade.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do believe that as diasporans, African diasporan women, first is the fact that women trade, of course, we know the limitations, family issues, and so on. However, because they also have connections in the not only in the diasporan community, in the home country as immigrants, they are able to easily connect with the groups back in their home countries to facilitate that, just as every woman can. But then the cultural part of it is actually what comes to play here, where people have a responsibility to actually send funds back home. And so that's a cultural thing for Africans generally. Wherever you are, you must pool funds together and send back to your community to make sure businesses are initiated. So that's a cultural thing. I'm not sure about the other cultures. And so we could leverage that as a country like Canada to make sure that instead of just sending a pool of funds left, right, and center, with no formalized structure where you can actually capture the amount of funds being shipped out of our country on a daily basis, we can actually turn this into a pool of funds, maybe matched by the government, but, like formalize and put some specific governance structure around monies being shipped out for business purposes. So that's how people initiate their trading activities. You find a partner, whether from your homeland, community, people you did business with before in your profession. Keep in mind again that a lot of professional people are here and they did business before coming into Canada. And so those types of communities are the ones that I believe we can leverage extensively. So I cite a quick example. An architectural firm. My husband is an architect, for instance, trained 30 years before coming into Canada. He had his own firm. He traded for solid 30 years. Came into Canada trying to do the business and get his certification and all of those. However, remember, he had connections back home, building homes, designing buildings, a certified one. So he continues, and they continue to do the business, although he's here. So because this is a design job, he gets to do that, but it's across continents. And so he continues to do that, and they're able to earn some fees and send to him to keep up. That's business for us because whatever funds they make, they bring it into Canada. And I reckon that there are a host of several other businesses in such, in similar activities. We talk about 1.2 million people in Canada. I'm an investment banker myself, so I understand exactly the nuances of venture capital and so on. That's exactly how we raised our first funding for the entrepreneurship hub that we started before we now got our later funding. That all of this can be replicated in different parts of Africa.
I understand that. Look, I'm a big believer in leveraging diaspora. I was able to do that prior to politics, building my own business in international trade. And so I think it's important that we learn from these important examples you gave. I'm going to turn now to Ms. Dickinson. Ms. Dickinson, in Budget 2024, our government announced a $2.4 billion investment to support artificial intelligence through research, but also assistance to help businesses develop and adopt AI responsibly. Of course, AI will play a vital role in boosting productivity and perhaps even international trade. Just a few days ago, the World Trade Organization released a new report on how artificial intelligence may help shape the future of international trade. The report highlights how AI can help reduce trade costs and support small and mid-sized businesses access new markets. Now, Ms. Dickinson, with your wealth of knowledge, what would you currently make of AI and perhaps the impact it can have on women entrepreneurs and perhaps even trade?
Thanks for the question. I think, AI is one of those things that is only going to be good if it's applied properly and in the context of the sector that it's actually being applied for. And so when you think about AI, it's not this kind of big meaty thing. Well, it's big and meaty in many ways, but we need to actually bring it down to where can it help us in the sectors that we're very good at. So if we think about agriculture, if we think about technology in general in terms of productivity, and if we think about the energy sectors, the things that we employ the most people at, if we apply AI in the context of those sectors, I think that we will get the most from it. So I can only speak, more informed in an informed way about agriculture and the need to use AI in terms of helping women entrepreneurs in that space. I think there's a huge opportunity to take AI and help women entrepreneurs to be better equipped to grow their businesses because they can access tools that they can't get today. So AI as an enabler is a very good thing. AI as just some technology tool that's out there that you don't actually know how to apply properly is just another technology tool that's out there that you don't know how to apply properly. So I think it needs to be very much applied to the sector that it's going to support. And when that happens, then you will be able to cook with fire, as they say, because you're going to have good technology applied to a need that you have in a specific sector to help it grow.
Thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your opening statements. My first question will be for Ms. Dickinson. It might seem like a strange question, but I think that we should be asking this question. You talked about tariffs that will likely be implemented. And even outside of the Trump administration, we know that generally the Americans are looking towards protectionism. So my question will be, you talked about reinvesting in the domestic market. You talked about our dependency upon the American market and their exports. You talked about our partnerships with the U.S. We know that women-owned companies and women entrepreneurs have more barriers to access for different reasons, and they often struggle to export. So, of course, we're not happy to see these difficulties and these barriers, but some of them are looking more towards the domestic market. Could we see this as an opportunity, given that some of them will sooner or later have to go towards the domestic market? Could this be a sort of step ahead of others if we're needing to now turn more towards our domestic market?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Again, in the sectors that I invest in, which are the food and health sectors, we encourage greatly the exploration and development of the domestic market for all of the businesses we invest in. We believe that if we can grow a company successfully here, then export markets become much more readily available. We don't And those markets do not need to necessarily be always the United States. They can be other markets in Asia and Europe and other areas. And so I think that developing here, though, does require a lot of coordination between the provinces and changing in some of the regulatory challenges that these businesses face, which is interprovincial challenges and some of the legislation that exists and some of the regulatory concerns that exist. So there needs to be an opening up of the ability to sell inside of our own borders. And those things are real challenges, whether it's getting ingredient supplies, whether it's getting the type of resources you need and the type of market opportunities that help you for growth in our country. This is actually a bigger challenge sometimes than going into the U.S. is. So we need to make sure that if we want people to grow domestically, which I believe is a real good solution and we should, then we need to look at the rules and the regulations that may be stopping them from growing domestically. It shouldn't be easier to export to the U.S. if we can't grow our own market here at home.
Justement, aux États-Unis,
in the U.S., we know that there are certain policies and incentives. For example, October 7th, we had a meeting on the same study, and we talked about implementing a tax incentive that would encourage larger companies to do procurement with women-owned and women-led companies. In the U.S., this already exists. It's been established, and it's based upon a quota system. Do you think that this would be a good path for us to follow to help women entrepreneurs in Canada?
Yes, 100%. I think government procurement is a place to start, but I also think just incentivizing businesses to buy from women entrepreneurs and giving them the reward for doing so. I think that is one of the recommendations I made in my opening remarks. I do think that we can encourage large businesses to buy from women entrepreneur-led businesses by giving them some incentive to do so. I don't I'm a big believer in, not having quotas, but in some cases you need quotas. You need to start and change the dialogue, and that only starts when you actually measure and make people accountable to doing the right thing. And the way to do that is to not just necessarily, slap their wrist when they don't, but give them incentive too. So, it's the carrot versus stick approach, and I think that the carrot in this case is going to work far more effectively than the stick would.
Et puis maintenant, donc là, ça serait une forme.
So that would be a form of harmonization or standardization in terms of what's happening in the U.S. If we were to implement this incentive. But we also know that we will be reviewing the CUSMA agreement into 2026, the agreement between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. I'm sure that you are aware of this and may have some concerns. Do you think that Canada should suggest some changes that would allow us to focus more on women entrepreneurs that want to export? I know we were talking about the domestic market, but do you think that there is something that we should do for this review?
Yeah, I don't know how to, I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this for the committee so you can actually do something with my feelings on this. But so many of the challenges that women entrepreneurs face are about the right access to the right people at the right time. And that's generally because many of them do not have the connections to the business community in other markets, or get introduced properly, or actually have the strength and the courage of conviction behind them to actually fund properly. So yes, I think it's a challenge for a woman entrepreneur in general. It becomes even more challenging when you ask them to start thinking about export, because they do not have the type of connections, they do not have the type of resources, and they're not given the same opportunities. And so I think this is the bias I was talking about earlier. This exists. We have to think about how we can eradicate these biases. We have to remember that, women entrepreneurs are actually incredibly talented, that their businesses are proven to be more successful, that they have a lot of things going to them. But one of our witnesses today, Helen, was talking about the fact that many of them do not have they have many biases that they start with and many challenges, whether they're taking care of their parents, whether they're taking care of their children, whether they're dealing with domestic violence. There's many things that we have to address in order to help women to be able to export. So it's a very complex question you ask, but I do think that it is something that can be tackled by opening up trade doors through trade commissions, through other areas where we actually put a focus on helping support women entrepreneurs in other markets. Today, I think there is service that provides that, but whether or not it's actually driving the right results is questionable.
Very much. Mr. Desjardins for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being present with us today. I was very much encouraged by your testimony, in particular on three aspects. One, addressing the very real and very perverse issues that are both historic and social in Canada, that largely suppress or limit or create barriers for women's participation. I heard most particularly the intersectionality and the issues relative to that intersectionality. If you're an Indigenous woman, you're even more likely to see serious barriers, particularly those social barriers that are so severe as we are dealing with the very real crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women. You can only imagine how difficult that reality is, trying to build a business, trying to do the hard work of raising a family, and trying to stay alive. All incredibly challenging, and I want to just make space for the immense strength it takes to do that work simultaneous to building up communities through economic development. For the sake of time, I understand Ms. Dickinson will have to leave here shortly, and so for the sake of time and to the great respect of my other witnesses, if you don't mind, I'll focus my attention just to Ms. Dickinson, for the remainder of my questioning at this period, and then we'll turn for responses to the other members. I just wanted to be clear about that. Ms. Dickinson, you're a legendary entrepreneur in Canada. You have, for so many years, shown Canadians right across this country, most particularly women, that Canada can be a place where women succeed. Canada can be a place where entrepreneurship is possible, and Canada can be a place where innovation can be met towards, I think, a global crisis that I think we're all dealing with, which is serious issues relative to the supply chain that we have in Canada. We have a very weak supply chain. When I was first elected a member of Parliament, we had a national emergency where the British Columbia corridor between Vancouver and the rest of Canada, particularly my province of Alberta, was cut off overnight. What an immense impact that was to the livelihoods of Albertans. I hear that same pain when I hear Kim Olive, for example, mention the very serious barriers related to northern export and northern import as a severe challenge that I can imagine. Albertans, we dealt with it for a week. You deal with it every single day. That's a serious pain and a serious crisis that I think is important to this discussion. I want to focus on the intersection of these barriers, the historic and very large social biases. Ms. Dickinson, in 2022, APTN, also known as the Aboriginal People's Television Network, launched a new show called Bear's Lair in the style of Dragon's Den that champions Indigenous business owners. In each session, Indigenous judges listen to pitches from 18 entrepreneurs with $180,000 on the line. Are you aware of that show?
I'm not, but I love the idea of it.
Well, I agree. It does, I think, attempt to address that intersectionality. And I think through your testimony today, and I hope that you provide us some answers for clarity as to, in your personal experience working with Indigenous entrepreneurs, how we can better assist women and Indigenous entrepreneurs in trying to address some of the historic and social outcomes you speak about.
Yes.
Sorry?
Sorry. No, go ahead.
You, as a matter of fact, had invested in January in Indigenous-owned business known as Bannock Express, which appeared on Dragon's Den. Rachel Smith, the founder, accepted $80,000 for 20% of that business. Can you talk about what working with an Indigenous-owned business was like for you?
Right. So Rachel is a great example of, again, just back to Helen and Kim's testimonies on this. I believe she has 12 children. She has taken and adopted some of her sister's family after her sister passed away and had dealt with a whole bunch of family issues that came along with that. And then she started a company, and she started a Bannock company. And it was actually quite it's just a testament to her resilience and her persistence that she was able to do that. So what we did do for her was put her into our accelerator program, and without charging her to do so that she could get the type of education and support she needs at this stage of her business. She wasn't prepared yet to scale it, but we were able to help her get connections with Sobeys as a retail grocery location, and we were able to give her the support she needs in terms of mentoring, coaching, and programming to help her become a better entrepreneur. We have seen many Indigenous entrepreneurs on the show over the years. An increasing number of very strong entrepreneurs are coming out of the Indigenous communities, and I personally have want to support and help women across all areas of whether it's Indigenous or any of the other communities that exist in our country. I want to be able to help them. And so they need the focus. They need to have the type of support and programming, and they need to have the understanding because they are living in different circumstances. They are dealing with different challenges, and we need to acknowledge that. Simply, all women are not dealing with the same problem simply because we're women. We are dealing with different issues because of where we live, the challenges that we've been brought up with, and the communities that we reside in.
30 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Chair. And perhaps maybe, Ms. Dickinson, you can supply this in a written response, just because I think it's quite important. You mentioned something that's important to me, which is the expansion of Canada's value-added mechanisms, particularly in agriculture. I come from Alberta. I was a beef producer for a long time. As you know, much of our beef, just like every other agricultural good, gets exported, and the producer themselves is paying the same raw material inputs and aren't getting anything in return. I think it'd be really valuable to know from your expertise how we can strengthen domestic supply to good, innovative products here in Canada, so to support our innovative food and agricultural business. And I know we don't have enough time today, but if you could supply that if in a written response, that'd be very wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Williams, please. To Ms. Dickinson, we have Mr. Williams for 5 minutes and Ms. Fortier for 5 minutes. Hopefully we can get that in before you have to leave.
Yes, I'm good until 12:15. My meeting actually just pushed as I said, so I'm good for another 20 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Six more rounds. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to all our witnesses for attending today. It's great. This is a great topic to talk about entrepreneurship in general. Ms. Dickinson, thank you for being here today. With writing about capital gains tax increases across the board, do you feel this government has been particularly kind to entrepreneurs in Canada?
I don't think that the government has really understood entrepreneurs in Canada is how I might characterize it. I don't think it's trying to be unkind. I think it's just being I think it's got a lack of understanding of how entrepreneurialism works and what entrepreneurs need from government support. And so you do see things like, super clusters being put up and funding being made specifically for women entrepreneurs. But the rules and the parameters that are put around it actually are very anything but entrepreneurial. So I'd say it's more of a lack of understanding than potentially trying to be unkind.
You've written that the government claims the capital gains tax is an investment in Canadian businesses. Is there any real evidence that these funds are going to entrepreneurs, or do you feel it's just a cash grab?
I would say that until they determine and tell us how they're going to spend that money, it looks like a tax grab at this juncture until we understand exactly how those dollars are going to be deployed back into our economy in a meaningful way with some accountability to it. It does feel like it's a mechanism to get more tax for the government coffers.
I don't know if you've seen the recent charts that look at the GDP per capita in Canada. So we, for the longest time, kept pace with the Americans, but in the last 6 years in particular, there's been a big widening gap between the GDP per capita for Americans and Canadians. The average American worker now makes $22,000 more than the average Canadian worker. We've seen $500 billion sucked down, go back down to the U.S. Are we ready for a new Trump government in the South? And is this government equipped to handle what has already been a massive gap widening since the last 9 years?
I've been very vocal about the fact that we need a strategy for the future that is Canada's strategy, not a reactive strategy. Of course, we have to be prepared for what is going to happen with our neighbors to the south. But until we have our own plan and a strategy that actually focuses on taking advantage of our educated population, our skill sets, our natural resources, the things that we control, until we have a plan for the future that actually looks into the future and is not a short-term fix, we will be very subject to what happens in the U.S. Having huge implications on our economy. So I don't think we're ready because I don't believe that Canada has a plan and a strategy for the future.
And it's very concerning because the first time this started to happen was after 2016. So this government is here again, looking down the barrel of another Trump presidency, and we saw this gap widen. Do you feel that if we don't have a plan like you stated, but under this current government, we're just going to see that gap widening?
I think it is the responsibility of any government, whether it is this current government or if there is a new government and a new leadership in place, to have a plan. This is how business works. Business has a plan. It is not trying to please everybody. It is trying to stay focused and clear and level-headed about what it's trying to accomplish. And so, yes, I do not, again, I don't see a plan for our nation. I don't see a strategy for how we're going to win using our own resources to do so. And I see us being too reactive.
You're a champion for venture capital, and I love that. You talked about scaling as well. We do need to see scale in business in Canada. The U.S., the Americans generate $200 billion in venture capital a year. The Canadians only $6 billion of the last numbers. Particularly for women-led businesses, it's less than 2% of that venture capital. So how do we fix that problem, generating more venture capital, making sure that we have more funds that allow investors to take risks in Canadian businesses and to grow and scale those Canadian businesses?
Again, I think better tax incentives to encourage investment in whether it's VC funding or whether it's angel funding. I think there needs to be better incentives to do so. I can tell you, I'm well known. I am known because of a television show, and I'm known because I'm an entrepreneur. And when I raised my first fund, it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done because I was a woman. and so raising capital in the VC environment is not easy. I think every woman that has testified today can tell you that it's difficult to find capital no matter where you are. And so if I struggle to raise capital with my experience and background, you can only imagine how hard it is for anyone else in the VC environment to raise. And there are so many rules and regulations put around government and public funding that goes into the venture capital ecosystem that it becomes very difficult to access and deliver the kind of value that you want to deliver as a venture capitalist. There are the VC community is struggling in Canada right now. It's struggling to find private business that will put money into the VC ecosystem. There is far too much reliance on government funding for our VC ecosystem. So then if that's the case, you have to ask yourself, how can we encourage private enterprise to invest in VC? And that will only come with the right incentives.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fortier, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of you for being here with us today to contribute to this study that is very important and will allow us to have clear recommendations. I know that you've already shared some of those. I'd like to ask questions to Ms. Bobby Wash firstly. I think it's very interesting what you've shared so far as a statement, and I'd like to take advantage of your experience, and I hope that you can share this with us and maybe talk about the experience of other women that you know that have received support, who have been successful. Would you be able to talk to us about the importance of Indigenous women to economic development, and also if you have any success stories that we could that you could share with the committee today? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So, Indigenous women have a really important role in the communities, and it is a caregiving role, but it's more, right? So when we do become successful, we are seen as role models in the community that inspires other people to want to achieve that success in business as well, and they do become leaders in their communities. So I think that's really important to the Indigenous, not only to the Indigenous community, but also to Canada, right? Because if we have more Indigenous people who are successful and prospering, that makes an impact nationwide. And there's been some really cool examples that I've seen in speaking with Indigenous women, just even locally in the region where I am in Northern Ontario. I just learned this weekend that Catherine Corbier, she's a welder on Manitoulin Island, so it's a very male-dominated trade. She actually, she designed and created the new trophy cup for the National Lacrosse League, and the National Lacrosse League is located in Pennsylvania. So she actually was there over the weekend and delivered the cup, and was there when the cup was presented on the field for the National Lacrosse field. So it's where she's combining creativity with the skills that she has as a welder and really bringing that across Canada. And now she's also going into the U.S. There's another woman who also is on Manitoulin Island, just because I'm so close. Her name is Anong Being, and she comes from a family of artists. And she now makes non-toxic watercolor paints, and it's in plastic-free packaging, so it's sustainable. And she was the first Indigenous product in indigo. And she's now shipping across the world, and she's overcome a lot of financial adversity and personal adversity in relationships. So I'm really proud to share, and I've spoken with her. She went into a lot of detail about some of the adversity that she's overcome. But I'm really proud to share some of the experiences she shared with me, that she's really successful, and she's still a small business in the eyes of, government assessment of business sizes, but she's making a really big difference in her community, but also showing people that you can have paints that are non-toxic, that are sustainable.
Great, thank you. And to Paktutit Inuit Women of Canada, really glad that I get to hear from you today. I work closely with the Inuit women in the riding of Ottawa-Vanier. There's a large population, especially on the arts and culture. Do you have, by any chance, any any examples of Inuit women being successful and receiving support from the government to be able to export their products?
Well, there's many household businesses that women work out of. Like there are some women that sell their artistry, but I know of one woman here where I reside in Newfoundland and Labrador, and there's a woman that lives in Nunatsiavut, and has expanded her business very well. She has two hotels and 3 grocery stores in 3 different communities in Nunatsiavut. There's 5 communities in Nunatsiavut. For support from the government, I'm not sure if she had received any to build up her business, but has slowly expanded over time, and it's amazing to witness and watch her grow.
Thank you very much.
Okay, on to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Oui, est-ce que Madame
Is Ms. Dickinson still with us? Yes, great.
We're going to keep asking her questions.
Excellent.
Great. According to a report, there are going to be logistical issues in terms of shipping costs, and that will greatly affect exporting companies that are owned by women. So border issues are the second major barrier that have a significant gap between genders. Why do you think that women-owned businesses struggle more in terms of border issues, and how can we reduce these issues?
I probably need to give that some thoughts. I haven't seen that report, so I would like to read that report, and I would definitely come back to you with some thoughts on that specific question. Feeling a little bit more educated about the challenge, if I may.
Ceci dit, en fait, vous n'étiez pas au courant, disons, de la...
Were you aware of the inequalities and the difficulties and the difference that we see between women-owned and male-owned companies, even if you weren't able to read the specific report? Personally, were you able to see these barriers as well, and how would you explain them?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking in general about the differences in terms of again, I think I'm coming back to my original answer around the opportunities and the relationships and the doors that are opened and why they're opened and not opened. I can only speak to bias as being the biggest challenge that is being faced here. I don't have any other answer for it. I can't imagine why there would be any other reason that there would be more difficulty for a women-led business to be able to not to be able to have the same opportunities that a male-led business does, other than a bias. There's too much evidence that points to women-owned businesses being incredibly successful, and in fact, generally more successful. So I don't have an answer other than societal bias.
Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This idea of an industrial strategy, I think, is one that is one that has both curiosity, but also, I think, perhaps a very high level of innovative potential. Should the country, for example, organize our significant natural resources along with our significant amount of skilled labor towards a common goal that would signal, for example, to investors, signal to trade unions, and signal to those perhaps like Indigenous businesses in the far Arctic, how they could be involved in something that could champion a product here in Canada that, for example, maple syrup, one of the largest both commercial but also national advertising priorities we had throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This product, being so simple, was actually designed by the country. The government used significant resources to align what was a traditional skill set of harvesting maple into a very highly valuable, highly developed, innovative, and exportable product. This kind of industrial strategy, I think, is something that's as a scholar myself, really interests me, of how we can create incentives for both workers, but also incentives for our country to take maybe a national approach to the products and championing our national exportability. Maybe I can spend a moment just on Helen Babawash to speak about how we can maybe reproduce that kind of level of innovative and advertising and market power towards an Indigenous led product like the Jolly Jumper, for example, one of an Indigenous women-made product now exported across the globe. And I'm so proud of it. It's something we don't champion enough in our country. We should be proud of the fact that we invented things. Women who are Indigenous invented something that's the most recognizable aid for children. Ms. Babawash, what's another innovative solution or an innovative product that you think could propel Indigenous women to that level of national, international prestige?
So you're talking my language when you talk about maple syrup, because I've spent a lot of time in the bush gathering syrup and helping people to get it ready. So one thing that I really noticed since COVID really was declared a pandemic is that the beadwork artists across Canada are really thriving because of that access to the use of social media now. And I feel like that industrial type strategy could really benefit the beadwork artists to just have something that's a more planned and thought out for the larger industry of beadwork artists. And I think because really those artists are all over Canada, they're in the north, they're in the south, they're urban, they're rural, they're remote, and it would make it could create a lot of change and prosperity for those beadwork artists.
Thank you very much. Mr. Martel, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. Thank you, Ms. Dickinson, for having spent a little extra time with us. So first, question for you, Ms. Dickinson. The Liberal government has implemented costly programs such as the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy. But data shows that gaps between men and women in terms of company longevity remain. And so I'd like to know, in your opinion, why did these programs not allow for us to make up for these gaps, and what changes should be made to them?
Partly, I believe they have not made up for the gaps because the bureaucrats that created the programs were themselves not entrepreneurs. And you need to involve entrepreneurs in the development of and shaping of the program themselves, not just an input into the program. And so I think that's partly what's happened, is that the shaping of the programs themselves have not been led by entrepreneurs, and the actual implementation has created barriers to participation. So why is it not being successful? It's difficult to navigate. It's difficult to understand. It has too many, I would say, rules and regulations around access and what does apply, what doesn't apply, how you apply, when you apply, where you apply. So there's that. And then I think it doesn't acknowledge exactly what you've heard from all of us today, which is women have a different reality. The reason they don't stay in businesses longer is it is very difficult to manage all of the things that fall on a woman's shoulder. We saw this through COVID, where women were taking on the responsibility of childcare, child education, home and parent care, dealing with the home itself. And they gave up their careers and their businesses in exchange for helping deal with the family, the home, and everything going on at the home while their husbands were still working. And so there is a trade-off that happens in many relationships where women are the ones who pay the price, and they give up their abilities and their opportunities in exchange for what is expected of them. And this is, and there's some women that are making these choices because that's what they believe. But if you'd ask me about the strategy, the women's strategy, it does not acknowledge that there is another aspect to our lives that we have to deal with. And so women are burdened. They're overworked. They have a lot of pressure on them. They have a lot of other challenges they're dealing with. And that's not reflected in the strategy. So the strategy is, I'd say, not written by an entrepreneur, and it's not necessarily written for a women entrepreneur.
Madame Dickinson.
Ms. Dickinson, We know that the Liberals promised billions of dollars to small and medium enterprises, but there has been mismanagement and favoritism in terms of distributing this funding. As an investor, how do you evaluate the transparency and the effectiveness of the allocation of funds to women-owned companies? Should there be better accountability to deal with the issues that are here?
Yes, I mean, I can tell you that my fund has invested in about 35 businesses, of which we have seen many of them, too many of them who are female-led, go out of business because they could not access funding. So you have to ask yourself, how effective is the program if these businesses that are starting to get traction, have done all the hard work, done all the heavy lifting of innovation, creating a product or creating a service, taken it to market, found product market fit, being able to, scrape their way through, whether they've, used their credit cards or however they've gotten to a place where they finally get some traction and they can't get funding. They're either too small, they don't have the right strategy, they're measured by the wrong metrics, and so they don't get funding. And so we are seeing in the market today a dearth of companies that are going out of business because they cannot find funding. Yet at the same time, we know that there are billions of dollars that are available for funding. So how is that possible? We do not have that big a population. We do not have that many, in need right now in terms of we have that many in need, but we don't have that many getting money. So where is the capital going? Where is the accountability on the capital? And where's the accountability to the results on the capital? So I believe that we have, again, too many of the wrong measures and too many of the wrong people looking at whether or not these programs are successful or not. There doesn't seem to be reporting on the success. The success metrics are not printed that I'm aware of. And so, yes, it's a problem. We have a serious problem in this country. Businesses are going out of business because they can't raise capital and they can't get it from the financial institutions that the government has established to provide capital.
Thank you very much. We're way over, Mr. Martel.
Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Dickinson. Thank you very much. I understand you have to leave, but thank you very much. On to Mr. Sheehan, please, for 5 minutes.
And Arlene, before you go, just wanted to thank you for your testimony. And I know you have to leave, but you touched on a mild criticism you said about entrepreneurship programs being uncoordinated between the federal, provincial, perhaps local governments. If you have time, would you be able to write, because I know you have to leave, just write out your thoughts on that? Because I think that's very, very critically important, because when people go knocking on the wrong door, when they have limited time, as all our presenters have said, whether it's a caregiving role or it's a safety issue, that, they can't be knocking on wrong doors when they actually have that time. So if you have an opportunity to write that up with your expertise, it would be so welcome. Thank you.
I'd be happy to. Thank you very much to the committee for hearing me out and for your questions. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Response, if you could send it to the clerk, and your responses will be distributed to the committee. So thank you very much. Okay, back to Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you very much. And thanks again to all the presenters. This is very, very informative. And I would like to ask Helen Bobby-Wash, who is from Northern Ontario, and I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, and the traditional territory of Garden River and Batchewana First Nation and the Métis people, home of Turtle Island and Bowating. And recently we've been working closely with First Nations and entrepreneurs as it relates to environmental opportunities and businesses that are being developed by the First Nations in the area, including a $747,000 announcement we just recently did to protect, Lake Superior, Lake Huron, St. Mary's River, the flora and fauna like the bats up in the Missinaibi Cree area. And the reason why I bring that up is it's absolutely critically important because we have a Great Lakes fishery. You got to remember that the area where I settled, or my ancestors settled, was the traditional fishing grounds for many people that came from all over what is currently United States and Canada to fish. And when they were there, they used to trade. It was just natural. You're there, you started doing business and trading. One things that we can continue to do to strengthen, those things such as the fisheries that are done on Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, up in Agua and those areas, as well as other things that we can do with using FedNor as a tool, which is a regional economic development agency.
Thank you for your question. I spend a lot of time actually in Sault Ste. Marie, so happy to be here with you today. So as far as the fisheries are concerned and the Great Lakes, the Great Lakes are at the heart of Mother Earth and Turtle Island. It's really important to us. And I look to the model of the Coastal Guardians that exists in BC, and I really feel like, and I know that there's starting to be some federal funding that's starting to come available for I'll say Indigenous environmental guardians, whether it's for the land or the water. There more needs to be done to recognize the knowledge and the expertise of Indigenous people with respect to the environment. But I really believe that Guardians program really needs to be fully funded around the Great Lakes, combination of federal, provincial, to really support the life of that water. And I also believe that additional investment in the training, because it's STEM, right? So it's science and technology, and Indigenous people still aren't achieving the same outcomes as non-Indigenous people when it comes to post-secondary education. So if we can access additional resources to be able to study those fields and to show that in addition to our Indigenous knowledge around the environment, that we also are carrying Western knowledge, then it brings more credibility, unfortunately, within the ecosystem for environmental scientists.
And other things too as well. The thing about FedNor is now with Indigenous Services, and I know the minister is talking a lot about economic reconciliation. How important are regional economic development agencies in helping what would appear to be a very thriving Indigenous entrepreneurship culture? I see so many businesses that have started up in the last few years. If you could make a few comments on that growth.
Thank you so much. So I am very familiar with FedNor, being in Sudbury and having worked with the First Nations. And I feel that those regional development organizations are super important because they understand the economics in the region. They're closer to the communities and they have a better understanding of the communities, and they often develop better relationships because they're there more often than other program staff. I've seen it with FedNor. I've also seen it in the Atlantic Canada with the regional agency there. And I think it really comes down to that ability to develop stronger relationships.
Thank you very much.
Understanding again.
Thank you very much. Mr. Baldinelli, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. It's interesting. All of the witnesses almost entirely have spoken about the difficulties, and they have discussed the challenges with regards to access to capital. I want to begin with Ms. Oliade from the CASA Foundation. You had mentioned earlier in your testimony that you had been in investment banking. I mean, what we've seen is globally women-led startups receive just 2.3% of venture capital funding. How can we scale our programs to address any kind of barriers in venture funding for women-led businesses?
Thank you again. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. For me personally, I believe that scaling those hurdles will include a certain set of actions. One, the fact that venture studios will become more applicable to women, where you create a platform, ecosystem platforms, where women have direct access that is curated, specifically curated for women. Currently, the structure is not so. It's general, and the barriers are because of the bias, the issues we've spoken to here today. The other witnesses have alluded to the fact that barriers exist because people are so comfortable to dealing with our male counterparts, and that's just the truth. It's there, they enjoy that. And so if you curate specifically venture studios or venture labs, equity venture capital studios, I think that would be a major solution. Why is that so? On those studios, you have access to different resources, mentorship with like-minded people, people watching your back. And so women have difficulty in networking and creating their own board members sometimes because of the domestic family-related issues. At those venture studios, it's where you have people, like-minded people gathered. You can choose your board members from there. You can seek mentorship from there. They become accountability partners to you because there's peer-to-peer accountability, because you are within the same group. It's easier than when you now mingle with the men.
So that would be to your earlier point in your testimony, talking about those ecosystem platforms that need to be created. So if you had a recommendation, would you discuss possibly policy changes that the government could consider to address that venture capital by doing certain issues such as that?
Absolutely, I would. It will be an adjustment to the existing policy, perhaps, or the existing strategy that guides the entire operationalization of the women entrepreneurship strategy. And so I talked about creating venture studios, creating perhaps an endowment fund. I'm not sure what you call it in terms of policy. However, those things will go ahead and give some assurance, some comfort level in women who have actually secured initial funding levels to know that their continued sustainability is guaranteed. So yes, they've secured the first level of funding, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, and so on, and they've been able to set up their businesses for the next 2 years. But what happens after 2 years? That's why they keep going down, because after 2 years, the long-term sustainability of those businesses is no longer guaranteed. And at the ecosystem labs and studios is where they can also access easily clients. So you know that sometimes, because it's difficult for women to network in the evening like our male counterparts, they can go golfing at 1 a.m. They can secure mentorship with the male counterparts. Perhaps a spouse might get upset. So at the venture labs secured for women is where they get mentorship from role models who have done successfully well.
And I just want to build on some of the testimony of other witnesses with regards to the capital gains tax. Some of these capital gains tax reforms have raised concerns among women entrepreneurs. How might these challenges disproportionately affect women in international trade? And what would be your recommendations to mitigate potential negative impacts?
I mean, yeah, there's no gainsaying the fact that there will be there will be major impacts on revenues and so on. And the reason is because women are currently struggling to actually build revenues and so on from the businesses they manage. And so because of the limited access to capital and so on, and the limited revenues that are being generated currently, if you impose another set of taxes on those, that would actually negatively impact the current levels of business. And so I believe that there are other ways that that we're currently talking about incentivizing women in trade, women to do business globally, internationally, and so on. I think those will be the direct focus, or those will be my own recommendations, to focus on those areas and perhaps create policies that would possibly reduce the amount or reduce the levels of taxes that will be imposed on the businesses that are not yet flourishing, instead of damaging the little that they have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Badaway, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And what I'd like to do today with the witnesses, and I appreciate your coming out and giving your insights, is receive actionable insights. This meeting is not our meeting. This is your meeting. And we have analysts here, or an analyst here, that we depend on to take your insights and, of course, make that as part of the final report. And, of course, recommendations will come out of that, and we would expect a response from the minister. So I'm going to throw out an open-ended question to all of you to receive those insights for the analysts to come up with some of those recommendations. So given that the challenges faced by women entrepreneurs in accessing international markets, and this is all about Canadian women and international trade. So with that, accessing markets such as financing, trade networks, what targeted measures or programs do you all believe could help reduce these barriers and enable more equitable participation of women-led businesses in global trade? I'll start off with Ms. Oliad, if you want to go first.
Thank you again very much for your question. Thank you, Madam Chair. Creating, making some adjustment on the current strategy is important in the following areas, I believe. One, the venture studios that I mentioned is one. Secondly, cultural trading, tailoring, curated tailoring of the type of education. Everybody talks about digital literacy, financial literacy programs, and so on. But, the way people understand these programs are different one from the other, depending on the culture you come from. And so it should be culturally tailored to the needs of the women. Because what I understand to be financial literacy, it's general for sure. However, it might be different from how somebody from Asia understands it. For me, financial literacy is actually pulling together funds and making sure my family succeeds with it. It's not general as you might expect sometimes. So it could be that, curated, to the needs of the women. We're talking about capacity building for women. Capacity building in terms of women are not incapable of running these businesses, as I must mention. I had to write an article on that, what's wrong with women on TED. But the issue then is the expectations from women are different. First and foremost, family. While the family is being managed on those ecosystem platforms I alluded to, business is also being done on the other side. Businesses are done more successfully by women when they know that their families are okay. It's general to women. It's just a natural order of who we are. And so if we're able to do that and then get funding in the process, you become more productive. And, just to quickly make a point on what, the honorable gentleman said, Blake, I think that what gets measured is what gets done. And so if we're able to identify some specific commodities that we can tie to that and say, here are the major items that we are known for here, can we have women in business and trade who are able to replicate and take this globally for us? That might also be another way to look at it, alluding to some of the points he made. So I think we should create products specifically and say, these are some of the targets for year 1 to 4. Let's take this internationally. And they are well needed. Tech and so on.
And if I may, I want to get to the other two before. Okay, thank you. Any more comments that you might have, please send it in to us, because that's exactly what we're looking for, and we can make it as part of your testimony. Even the comments that you send in after the meeting would be part of your testimony as well. Thank you for that. Ms. Bobby Wash.
Thank you. So I'm going to focus on two. One is the staff training internally within the federal government, making sure that they all have training around Indigenous cultural training so that they better understand the Indigenous experience, and also providing that trauma-informed training that I had expressed earlier in my opening statement. And then the other one I just wanted to touch on is earlier there was a discussion around that women-owned businesses don't have the longevity like that men do. Well, in order to have that longevity, we need to have some certainty in funding and financing available and just what the ecosystem is that we're operating in. So I would say the programming also needs to be established for a longer term basis. So there has to be a longevity to the programming, not just a 3 or 5 year budget commitment. It needs to be ongoing so that there is some certainty to the agencies who are supporting those women entrepreneurs.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes, I'd like to echo what Helen Bobby Wash said. Training, I think, is important for it's important that people who work or will work with Indigenous groups have that trauma-informed training to understand that's one of the barriers that we have to deal with to move ahead and get ahead. I would like to also submit a written submission to enhance my answer to that.
Please do.
Thank you.
As I said, if you do have an opportunity, take some time and put a paper together to send to the committee so that way we can add it to your testimony. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Merci. Ma prochaine question ira maintenant vers...
Thank you. My next question will be for Ms. Bobby Wash. So your a chartered accountant. There has been a study on female Indigenous entrepreneurship by the University of Laval that says that the Indian Act would make access to funding and to capital more difficult. Several witnesses have confirmed this for me in recent meetings. Clause 29 on those companies that are on a reserve also adds barriers and makes it more difficult for them to access capital. We've talked about restrictions on property transfers that make it more difficult for them to access property and run a company. Would you agree with these statements?
Thank you for that question. Absolutely, I do agree and I've seen it myself because I have worked in the lending business in the past, and I've seen where you go to a bank and they can't take security on the First Nation, so then that increases their risk on lending, so they're not going to lend to the organization, and that's why Indigenous financial institutions have become that important part of the financing structure within many First Nation communities. But it's not only First Nations, it's also off-reserve businesses also have their own challenges, less pertaining to the Indian Act, though.
Parfait, merci. Donc, puis est-ce qu'il y a d'autres outre...
Thank you. And other than that, are there any other impacts from the Indian Act on entrepreneurship, other than the restrictions that were already mentioned?
I'm going to say this because the Indian Act is a colonial legislation, and it actually wasn't intended to be a permanent piece of legislation. It was only supposed to be temporary. I think that has long implications for Indigenous entrepreneurship as well, and for women in particular, even because the Indian Act was very, very patriarchal, and there were clauses in the Indian Act that showed that women were at a lesser level of status than Indigenous men. So that still exists, and the fact that we have these experiences that, as particularly for women, we have lower economic status, lower education, all related to the fact that of our indigeneity as well as our gender, it's going to continue to affect us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Desjardins for 2.5.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Going to Kim Olive, just the question of the challenges you face, particularly representing businesses and knowing, I'm sure, a great deal of entrepreneurs in the north that are suffering unique challenges relative to the geography. Canada is the second largest country in the globe. It still surprises me today that we don't have an ability to use the immense wealth we have to create supply chains from the north to other areas, particularly even just other urban centers in Canada, let alone an international output. Some of those challenges are unique to the north, in particular the more recent issues relative to climate change. How has climate change impacted entrepreneurs in your region, and how are they overcoming those barriers?
I think climate change is impacting everyone, not only in the north, but everywhere. But I would also like to make a written submission, if that's okay with you.
Thank you so much for being present with us today. Now move to Oyalade. If we can ask some questions about relative to the training that you're making recommendations for, the training that could, I think, assist in what is, I think, a cultural competency is what you're talking about, ensuring that agencies, particularly federal agencies or even private agencies that are seeking to attempt to work with particularly businesses that you represent, that they're going to have challenges relative to cultural sensitivity, cultural understanding, cultural awareness. Why is it so important to have that kind of training, you think, in particular for government officials when dealing with supply programs like the Women Entrepreneurship Fund?
Thank you again. Thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier, because of the divergence and the diversity that exists, we're diverse people. And so definitely people learn differently, but the cultural issues even bears more importance in that. Let me quickly cite an example. When you look at a a general, regular African woman in business. We're trained not to borrow. That's our background. And so when you come into a country that actually thrives on the credit system, that's a taboo from where we came from. I mean, just for me to quickly allude to that. So we take people out. We are trained that we have to build savings over the years. And so that's why ROSCA, schemes like the SUSU, I'm not sure if you've heard about that, they're like cooperatives and so on. That's why it thrives within those systems where you have Asian communities like the Indians, like the Africans. I believe a few cultures that are traditional might understand that. So it's called the SUSU. So if you don't have the money, you go into the community to put it together and borrow from communities. That's why when you have your own funding, you pull it together and send back. Now, I'm not talking about the large-scale businesses that are into the extractive sector and, the medium and very well-established businesses. I'm talking about the small businesses, the medium-scale businesses, because those ones are actually the ones that constitute the engine of any nation. And so if we must build them, we must be mindful of the background. And so we don't go out eating because we're going for dinner or buying clothes with a credit card until you are told and lectured that you need to build a credit history for you to even be able to access the resources in the land. And so that's why we now have to retrain ourselves. But then you find that averagely, generally speaking, that's the culture. So if you now generalize the training for everyone and say, this is the way you understand it to be, this is how it should be, I'm saying no. I wasn't raised to be that way. I don't spend money that I don't have. But then now we've learned to understand how that works and then maybe pay back after a while because your mom will give you a beating. You don't want that. So those are the nuances. And we must understand those intersectionalities and kind of wrap them into the maybe whatever, the policies and so on. And that's why it's important to do that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I hope it did too, because we certainly gave you sufficient time to make sure you make the point. So thank you so much. Mr. Martel for 4 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
For you and one for Mr. Baldinelli.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, merci.
Thank you. So my first question will be for you, Ms. Oyelade. Am I pronouncing it okay? Under the current government, the support programs seem to support symbolic help instead of real tangible support on the ground. So I would like to hear what advice you would have for us to create more targeted, tangible support from the government that is more viable for entrepreneurs.
Thank you again for the question. Thank you. I think a balance could be struck between both, whether it's symbolic, whether it's targeted. Targeted is important for economic growth, and so that's really important. I think that my experience from the resources that are available and that we are groups and community ecosystems have been able to tap into, the ones that I manage. I think what I've seen is the fact that we've seen a lot of resources released and a few people, I think it's the information part of it, the availability, the access to some of the resources. Some of the resources are indeed available. The issue is I'm not sure, I'm not certain if everyone has access to those resources because of the available information, because they are aware and so on. So that's one part of it. I think when you talk about targeted resources or targeted support, I think that for the women entrepreneurship strategy, that has really helped. From my own experience, we are not a beneficiary of such support. However, I do know a few groups that have reached out to us to say this is available through the Women Entrepreneurship Loan Fund and so on. The issue, though, is we're not able to quantify. We have the data, or is readily accessible, the ones that are in Canada. globally, women in trade, I'm not sure that there is ample data for us to measure how well people are doing. So we keep banding the percentages. Oh, so there's 16.8% of women in business, 10% are exporting now from Canada. How is that when you compare it to what used to happen before the strategy started? I think those are the balances we need to strike. The other part of it, so if we're able to measure that effectively, then we'll know where the gaps are coming from, and then we'll know how to deal with those gaps based on the inputs today. The other part is targeted. I think that, I mean, I'm Black or BIPOC, and so I know that there are some targeted resources that have been released also to that community of the BIPOC entrepreneurs. That has really helped, I must say, because before now, I never saw those types of targeted resources, and so that has helped.
Excusez, Madame Aloy, c'est parce que...
Sorry, I just have another question to ask as well, since we're running out of time. The current government, Canada, is continuing to move backwards in international rankings in terms of our competitiveness and innovation. And this particularly affects women-owned companies. In your opinion, has the government compromised the future of women entrepreneurs because of a lack of clarity in terms of its measures for innovation and competitiveness? And what recommendations would you suggest for change?
All right. I draw quick analogies between what we're doing in Canada, for instance, and maybe the U.S. and maybe China, for instance. And so I know for sure that if you do a quick comparative analysis, I think you can actually easily say that Canada has been a little timid when it comes to how we push women internationally. We could say that. But that's just one part of the fact, because from some of the other information and data, perhaps, that we're beginning to read now, it would appear that some new measures are being taken to push that in the international space. I do know, for instance, that when you look at the Chinese government and the stake they took in building several centers across Africa, because I'm originally from there, from Ghana to Nigeria and so on, they took what you call a deal called oil for land. Construction for land, rail lines and so on, took large amounts of land and started building incubators and so on across parts of there. We would have assumed that that would be a step that should be taken, but Canada is a little conservative, so that needs to change. However, the current structure, we might ride on top of that because there's already a structure. There are already policies in place and strategies in place that we can build upon and go into those areas.
Thank you very much. You have used Mr. Martel's time, but, I'm going to give Mr. Baldinelli that 1 minute he was asking for.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Oliad, for your time. And I'm just going to build on what my colleague had talked about. I mean, you spoke about tailored programs, addressing some of the key cultural differences that exist amongst women entrepreneur groups. But, as a board member that serves in both Africa and North America, what key differences do you see in supporting women in international trade between these regions? Are there key or are there best practices that we could adopt from other regions to apply here?
Absolutely, and thank you again for your question. Absolutely. If you look at, some of the corporations, the way they're structured, there are a few things. I think it's the flexibility of ideas, generating innovative ideas. The platforms where you can readily submit your papers to, like we're being allowed to do today, but not at government level. It will be at the organized private sector level, the non-profit levels, because people have access to those sources, to those platforms. And I think we need to be more open-minded as to how we allow contributions of ideas, concepts, and so on, and allow people to build on top of that, whether it's at organized private sector level or corporate level, I think.
Thank you very much. And again, when you submit in writing some of your thoughts, you might want to cover that one off as well. Ms. Fortier for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again to all of you being here today. Madame Oyelade, I'm hearing you about measuring and data. Do you have specific measures you think we should be taking into account? I understand the general thought of going through with measurements, but do you have specific measures that you think we should move forward with?
Yes, and thank you again, Honorable Mone. I would take a cursory look again at the BWIT. That's the Business Women in Trade program. I don't have the full details of that program. However, I understand that program has been in existence for a while. It works, it's tailored to work under the Trade Commissioner services in the regions. And the main purpose would be, like pulling together events, making sure you connect groups together with regionally and with indigenous businesses at those locations. I'm thinking that, just as a business person, that a lot of the people who really want to do business internationally perhaps might already have an idea of what they're looking to do. The primary expectation might not really be getting connected with businesses on ground, but actually having somebody hold their hands and support with some funding and capital to make sure that they get an inroad, like open doors and make sure that you connect us instead of organizing events and so on. And so we were thinking that aside from the Trade Commissioner services, if those BWIT teams can actually be saddled with the responsibility, with specific targets of helping not just to connect or holding events, but actually creating some capital for people also to go in, because it's a fund. But I think the fund has to do with the people themselves on ground organizing, but measuring, making sure that they get details, more data. How many businesses have we supported? How many of them actually did partnership or were able to get into some partnerships? That becomes an indicator that could be measured over time, and then we can get more data. So we could take it up, because the name, as the name depicts, they're supposed to be supporting the business women in trade. So I'm not sure if that is being done. That's what I meant.
Thank you for that. And a question for all witnesses. What do you think of the tool of trade missions? I know that our government has done many trade missions. Just wondering if that would entice women to participate more on the global scale. So first of all, trade missions, is it a good tool? And second, if so, how do we entice women to participate to these trade missions that are made available? I'll start with online with Bobby. Helen Bobby Wash, please.
Thank you. I do agree that trade missions are a good tool to use. What I would like to see are women-specific trade missions, Indigenous women specific trade missions. And I know some of the criteria for trade missions are that you really have to show that you have something that you can actually that can be exported. And I'll use my business for example. It's a knowledge-based business. I can provide my accounting services anywhere around the world. I would love the opportunity to do Indigenous to Indigenous trade to share my knowledge, but then I have to prove that I'm ready. Yeah. And mine is a little simpler, right? I just have to go there and have to talk to people, right? Where I know just the requirements around having to prove the level of capacity that you're already at is a barrier. And I understand why, right? Because you want to be good domestically, right? Before you can export. But I think having these exploratory missions where people see, oh, this is actually an opportunity that I can actually pursue, just conceptually would be helpful.
Thank you. Kim, Oliver?
Thank you for the question, and I will be happy to follow up with a written submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Oyelade?
Well, for me, I think it will be the affordability, the cost. Because a lot of the businesses that we're talking about are still at that level where some of them are still struggling, and they will think twice about sorting out their businesses and so on internally before going international. And so it's not that they're not at the stage where they can actually expand internationally. It's just that priorities are different depending on the timing.
we've completed 3 rounds. Does anyone have one question that's just burning to be answered? We will be receiving information in writing from pretty much all of our witnesses today. So if everyone's okay with it, I will thank the witnesses so much. This has been such an interesting study, and I think we are all learning a tremendous amount from all of our great witnesses. So thank you all for taking the time to be with us today and for your information, and we look forward to your written reports. Okay, thank you very much. I will move Okay, thank you. On Thursday, we're dealing with softwood lumber. And on December 2nd, we're dealing with softwood lumber and emissions. So we'll do 1 hour on each one. Okay, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.